Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Elder Scrolls Spotlight, a podcast hosted by someone with too much time on their hands and is deathly afraid of social interaction. As always, this program is about roleplay and role-playing inside the Elder Scrolls Online MMO-RPG. Today we have with us another gentleman from the EU server. This man hails from the West Midlands of the UK and is a man after my own heart. You see, he's also a lover of history. However, whereas I am but a mere history buff, this man pursues it academically. He also plays an imperial, prominent on the DC side of things. Once the leader of the ever-popular Centuria Vindicta, you've seen him don his Centurion armor to fight for restoring the Heartland to its former glory. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I have with me Tyrrean Vanarius. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm doing really well.
I'm glad. So it's been a while since we last spoke. I think we first met back on TeamSpeak way back in the day. What's been new with you since then?
Well, a fair bit. Yeah, I've as you mentioned, I'm studying history now, formerly early medieval and ancient history, particularly with a soft spot for Rome. If my love of imperials didn't give it away already.
We're going to have so much fun. It's going to be great because we're going to talk about history. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I've got sources arranged already, don't worry.
So, before we go any further, I had this tendency to go ahead and try to refer to people by their real name on this podcast, as an effort to divide the character from the player. So would you be all right if I use your real name at any point at all with this episode?
Sure thing. Go ahead.
All right, cool. So we're going to change it up a little bit here before we get into the usual suspect of questions. Getting into the whole history bit, I got to ask, who are your top 5 Roman generals?
Ooh, top 5 Roman generals.
Top 5 Roman generals.
Right, well, I think
we're going to do it like this. We're going to do it between the late Republic to early Imperial era, and then we're going to jump real forward towards the Byzantine Empire. Let's do that.
Right, well, if we're going sort of late Republic, early Imperial, I think in no particular order, you've got to have Julius Caesar. I mean, it goes without question. Man was the Battle of Alessio, prime example of his tactical genius. You've got to go for Scipio Africanus as well, the defeat of Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, using his own tactics against him, and essentially ending the Second Punic War. Pompey Magnus as well, though people often forget about him for getting beaten by Caesar. He himself had his own conflicts and was an equally reclaimed general. That's 3 there. I think I'll go for some imperial ones now. Germanicus, though sadly dead well before his time, was a excellent field commander. And I'll probably also go for the winner of the Battle of Actium, Agrippa, who brought his friend Gaius Octavius, later known as Augustus, to power with the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra.
Okay. It's interesting that you picked Pompey. Most folks don't. They tend to look over what he did because of Pharsalus, which man, when you look at Pharsalus, it's one of those 9 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 times where sheer luck, well, not sheer luck, but just thinking by the edge of your seat wins over the usual tried and true tactics. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the thing with Pompey is if I was a gambling man, everyone would, the money would have been on Pompey to win that battle. It was just no one would have predicted, that his entire line would essentially just fold after Caesar's cavalry charged.
Honestly, I blame the senators. Really, I do. He had I forget who he had with him, but they were all pressuring him for the battle.
Yeah, Cato and people like that. Yeah, very much wanting to defeat Caesar in the field of battle. Sort of mos maiorum. As was the way of Rome. Whereas Pompey had the valid tactic of just starving out Caesar, and that would have been more effective. Pompey probably would have won, and history would have been very different.
It would have been. Here's the thing, though. It really goes against one of the cardinal rules in the art of war, which is like you don't respond to your opponent, you make your opponent respond to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you want to always control the field of battle, which is what the Romans were known for. If they could control the field of battle, they would win nearly any engagement. It's only conflicts where they couldn't do that, like Toyburg Forest and stuff, where they were thoroughly wiped out. And there's also Cannae, but Cannae was a special example because it's often the commander Varro was often attacked for the defeat, but he followed Roman military doctrine pretty much to the letter. It was Hannibal's double encirclement, and the sort of pincer movement was never tried before, and so no one could have predicted or done anything really to stop it.
You haven't really seen any, I mean, getting into Hannibal here, you haven't really seen any sort of maneuvering genius from the Romans after that. I mean, Scipio Africanus met him, but I can't think of any Roman general that would use maneuvering as a sort of foundational cornerstone in how they did battles. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's because for a lot of Roman period and Roman military tactic, it wasn't light attack. You've got the main of Roman army was the legionaries, heavy infantry. So it was very much using the discipline, the effectiveness of the legion. Whereas in the later sort of later empire, sort of Byzantine, later Roman Empire, you do see that because you see cavalry becoming a bigger part of the Roman doctrine, and you get sort of things like limitani incompetences, where you sort of get a shift into field armies and sort of garrison armies, and maneuvering becomes a bit more important then. But generally, Rome just used its effectiveness as sort of a disciplined fighting force and its ability to control the field of battle where it could, to essentially just dominate.
So let's get into the Byzantine Empire now. Top 5 generals of the Byzantine Empire.
Justinian. Sorry, not Justinianus. Belisarius. You've got to give the man some credit there for.
He's a given. For,
his reconquest of the West. Herculaneus as well, I think, is a good one. Good example of a later Byzantine. It's a bit later, but he was quite well known for his conquests and such. Ooh, who else? I need to think.
That's another thing about this show is I make people think, sort of, kind of.
Yeah.
Basil II, what was his name? The Bulgar Slayer.
Yeah, probably Alexius as well.
Okay. There are a few Alexiuses, so you're gonna have to specify there.
The Alexius of the Alexiad, the sort of reconquest of Byzantine territory.
Oh, right, okay, right. When you say Alexius, I think of Comnenus from the Crusades. I think that was
the Alexius the First.
Yeah.
To a degree, yeah. I did probably quite good in regards to he managed to get the Crusaders to regain a substantial amount of his territory.
Okay, let me ask you this. This is every Roman history sort of dude has their own theories about this. So I got to ask you, why do you think the Western Rome fell in 476? If you had to chalk it up to a few reasons, what would they be?
That's a loaded question. If there's ever been one, if I was Edward Gibbons, I'd hark on about moral degeneracy and the role of Christianity. But unfortunately, I'm not a rabid 19th century English gentleman. No, the fall of Rome was essentially. It was a lot of things. You can't really chalk it down to one factor. It was a mix of essentially the inherent failures of the Roman state itself, how it became sort of politically weak, and in an attempt to more effectively administer the empire, instead of the one-man rule, with Diocletian's tetrarchy and things like that. It's sort of you'd always create infighting because you'd always have the various Romans trying to one-up each other. I mean, the tetrarchy only lasted a couple of emperors until Constantine the Great destroyed it and replaced it with himself and his sons, who would then go and kill each other and bring everything back to where it started. But yeah, I think it was a political failure and the lack of any sort of strong leadership for a lot of it. It was the sort of weakening of the Roman armies is a major one as well, because you had the Roman armies essentially rely more and more on foederati and Germanic auxiliaries, and essentially what was once the citizen soldier who were loyal to Rome and to its ideas, essentially now they were German mercenaries just doing it for the money. They didn't have much of the shared culture or effectiveness of Rome, and that itself proved a major problem, because you essentially have people who you're bringing into your territory, training training them how you fight, and then essentially they're going back to their people, and now you've got people who fight like Romans.
I mean to cut you off. You were saying?
No worries. It was the weakening of the legions with and the replacement of them with foederati. Essentially meant you're training up they were training their enemies, and when push came to shove, you had barbarians at the gates. They were already in your territory. You'd essentially let them in. They knew how you fight, and Rome. It had been on the decline for a while. The people put the fall of the Western Roman Empire as like just some cataclysmic event that just happened overnight. Really, since the end of the Pax Romana, with the end of the Five Good Emperors with Commodus, you essentially had just the slow decline of Rome.
A lot of that really is Edward Gibbon's way of thinking. Yeah, he did chalk it up to Commodus overspending and everything, and that's what set pretty much the decline.
I think it was less overspending that did it, and more the fact that you essentially tyranny and sort of despotism became more commonplace. With you would have to be a strong man to rule, but generally they weren't tyrants. They weren't considered tyrants. Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius. They were competent rulers who were able to manipulate Roman society and the Roman political structure. With people like Commodus, you essentially had no interest in ruling. You sort of they turn over towards despotism, and from Commodus onwards, you essentially get the empire just sort of being bought and sold. You get worse emperors who are very unsuited for the job. They're either the barrack emperors who essentially just proclaimed emperors by their legion and use military might to rule, well, that's pretty much it. I was going to say propped up by the Senate, but the Senate was neutered well before this. But yeah, you get people who are very unsuited, and you get a list of very, very bad emperors, such as Elagabalus, who is probably the worst emperor in Roman history, at least in my opinion.
Really? That's okay. I mean, I know he put up statues of Hannibal all over the place, which tend to...
It's more, when you're murdered at 19 by the Praetorian Guard for being, I'm going to be Gibbons here, literally a complete degenerate, then you're very much of this particular breed. He's one of the sorts who puts the debauchery of Caligula and Nero to shame somewhat.
Have you ever heard of the podcast, The History of Rome?
I've heard of it. I've never listened, though.
You should. I highly recommend it. Really does well to cover the history of the West. And he doesn't really... I mean, the host of the podcast, he doesn't describe Heliogabalus as the way you do, which is interesting. He's mainly what I go by.
Yeah, no, Heliogabalus is an interesting figure. He's probably more sympathetic if you look at him now, but in the theories of Rome, he was not exactly very well representing the status of what an emperor should be. He was propped up by his mother, brought in from the east, and essentially saw himself as some sort of Syrian god, such called him Syrian sort of sun god, such why he called himself Heliogabalus in other terms. But yeah, he sort of prostituted himself in the imperial palace, where it's a funny but slightly inappropriate story here. He would have the Praetorian Guard would have to go out into the city of Rome and essentially find him clients, and he would prostitute himself in the palace. And at the end of the day, he would walk around essentially boasting about how much money he'd earned as a prostitute. And this was the Emperor of Rome essentially doing this.
Jesus.
Yeah, he wasn't well liked. And there was another thing where he, in retrospect, he seems to appear what we'd probably consider nowadays transgender. because he very much was very effeminate. Called himself, I can't remember the name, but he was essentially the wife of a charioteer, and all refer to him as the wife of this charioteer who he was with, and very much sort of very effeminate sort of character, and something who looking at now we can probably sort of sympathise with, but at the time he was rather gave in more to debauchery than any sort of actual ruling of the empire.
Speaking of emperors and moving on from some of the worst ones, top 5 emperors across.
Top 5 emperors?
Yes.
Well, I mean, it would be quite easy to say the 5 good emperors.
Well, okay.
To be fair.
Scratching the 5 good well, okay, no, I won't blot the 5 good emperors, but okay, scratching, let's say, Augustus, and, scratching Augustus, because he's always a given.
Augustus is always clearly the principal example of a good emperor, but outside of them, I would probably say the Flavian dynasty were quite good, as in so much as they were able to quite manipulate and sort of use the structure of Rome, and were a relatively successful dynasty after the Julio-Claudians. But in total, 5 best emperors will probably be. I'm going to say, just for structure, Constantine probably is. He's quite a divisive figure, but even though he converted the empire to Christianity, I do think he is sort of restructuring and establishing Constantinople. Sort of, he gave some more life into the empire. He's a very, very late imperial figure, but he's one to say that. And I'd be biased. I feel I'm obligated to somewhat, considering I currently live in the city where he was crowned emperor, York, in northern England, which was at then the Roman city/military camp of Iberacum. Constantine the Great. I will go for. I go for Trajan, Hadrian. They're 2 very good ones. One who always gets forgotten as well. The Emperor Aurelian.
The star of Empire Divided in the
the Sol Invictus himself, the Restutia Orbis, the restorer of the world. Very an emperor who was killed long before his time. It was all over money as well. The Praetorian Guard murdered him because they didn't think they would get paid.
Really? I thought it was some advisor feared that some advisor made a mistake, and he was afraid that once Aurelian found out, he was going to die. So he made a fake assassin list and gave it to the Praetorian Guards, and they were like, "Well, can't deal with this shit. He's got to die."
I think I'm going to double check here because I might be. Yeah, no, you are correct. I am wrong. I'm thinking of someone else. But yeah, it was very much murdered by his own troops in belief that they would be knocked off or not paid. I'm trying to think who it was about not paying the emperor now. That's going to annoy me. Yeah, as you can see, even when
there's more than a few of them
there's few. The Praetorian Guard are the single least effective bodyguard in history.
I blame Tiberius for that. He blew up their numbers when they didn't need to be blown up.
Tiberius and Sejanus and people like that.
Yeah,
responsible.
You gotta feel sorry for Augustus to a certain extent, because if you found out this is what your dynasty would be doing long after you're gone, you'd probably be spinning in your grave. That kind of makes me sad when I think about it. He tried so hard to have a suitable heir, but it just never worked out.
Yeah, he didn't actually do well when it came to any sort of actual heirs. Though some of the Julio Claudians were relatively competent. Claudius, though oft looked over, was relatively effective, as was Tiberius, even if he didn't have a huge amount of interest in ruling. Though I suppose that's a 2 out of 4. Excluding Augustus.
It's not that bad when you have 2 out of 4. It's just the other
half of them weren't completely useless. No, it's more people who could have been, which is a lack as well, such as Germanicus, who Tiberius is rumored to have murdered because of his popularity.
You think so? I think that's just the usual historical gossip,
I think it's I wouldn't be surprised if Claudius did, though, because Germanicus's legions did at one point actually attempt to declare him emperor. They rose up and attempted to make him princeps, though he refused. But yeah, he was definitely a threat to Tiberius's reign since Germanicus was much more popular.
My next question to you is, which Total War game is your favorite?
Rome 2, I'm going to have to admit it. They were a game that I couldn't play for a while because it was very buggy and didn't run on my computer for start, but I plugged a lot of hours into it. Rome, the original Rome was a bit before I got into Total War, but yeah, Rome 2 is probably my favourite.
How many hours you got on it?
I will check. It's probably not an accurate representation since I played with mods and stuff that made Steam didn't count it. It's probably around 300-400, something like that. Something a lot, but not a ridiculous amount, thank God.
Moving right along, getting over to the actual interview, which will still contain some more history nerding out, but still. We already covered this, but we said that where are you from and how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Not at all. I'm generally lived in the West Midlands most of my life, near sort of, for anyone from the UK, sort of near Solihull area, which people who Englishmen will probably know where that is. But I currently live in York, up in the north of England, where I'm at uni, which is a bit of a change, but I like it here. It's a very good city for studying history, considering I'm surrounded by York's one of the oldest cities in England, nearly 2,000 years old, sort of thing. Very good period. You've got this period as a Roman city to a Viking one, to a medieval one, to a sort of Victorian and Georgian one. It's very much everywhere. But yeah, that's where I am now and where I'm from. And as you mentioned, I'm 20 years old.
I would never have guessed that you were 20. You sound just a tad older. I had to guess. I would have said like 23, 24 years old. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, it's better than someone who once asked if I was in my 40s, which still makes me chuckle to this day. Luckily, it was only on voice. I don't look 40. Right.
So, how'd you get into video games?
Oh, I've always been into video games pretty much since I was very young. My dad kind of played games a bit, and I kind of just got into that through him. I think if I remember back, the first game I can remember sort of playing, when it came out, was the original Halo on the original Xbox. Back in the day, just logging loads of hours into that. Yeah, it was a nostalgia every time I go back to the old Combat Evolved. But yeah, that's pretty much how I started. I played games like that. I was on console for a lot of my childhood, and then as I got older, it switched more from games like that to PC, more strategy games, RPGs, away from just the general sort of shoot 'em ups.
What is your favorite video game?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I think I'm probably going to go with Oblivion.
Okay.
Yeah, purely. Probably there's other games that are better, but I think there's just something about that just sort of nostalgia factor. It's sort of when I probably got into the Elder Scrolls and stuff, and there's just something about it, that I just can't put my finger on. Whereas there'll be games, I thought of a better story, better gameplay stuff. I just think there's just something about Oblivion that will always have a place in my heart.
Oblivion came at an interesting time when you think about it. Lord of the Rings just took off, I think.
Yeah, it was the top. Sorry, I've interjected. Yeah, the time when Oblivion came out, I think, is responsible a lot for it, and is responsible for a lot of things I'm not that keen on with Oblivion. But I think it's also responsible for a lot of its charm. It came out when that sort of generic sort of medieval sort of fantasy stuff was popular, and it's why you get sort of the shift from sort of the weirdness of Morrowind to a sort of more muted, sort of Renaissance-y sort of medieval fantasy game.
So then let's move from video games to MMOs. What was your first MMO? How'd you come across MMOs?
My first MMO, I think, was I played World of Warcraft for a little bit. Not very long. I never really got into MMOs that much. I dabbled with WoW. I got to play not much, up to level 50 or something, and then kind of dropped it. And I played Guild Wars 2 for a bit when that was first released, but never really stuck. ESO has been the first MMO that I've properly, sort of put a substantial amount of time in, leveled up a bunch of characters. I mean, I've been playing ESO since beta, pretty much non-stop, and it's probably the first MMO I properly got into.
Would it be safe to say that ESO is also would be where you got your first start in RP then?
MMO-RP,
Yes.
But I've done RP before in other sort of games and pen and paper, things like that. Yeah, this is the first time when I started to roleplay in an MMO. Yeah.
What was your first RP experience discounting MMOs then?
Pen and paper, D&D, and things like that. That's how I got my start, and also going way back, probably just playing games like sort of like Halo 2, Halo 3, things like that, and sort of just being a little kid-ish, and sort of just like making up stories, situations, just kind of playing a character sort of thing. It was something I've always done, even when when I was just playing other games. I'd always sort of I don't know, kind of tailor it, kind of get into the world rather than just like the mechanics that say shoot 'em. I was very much sort of essentially, role play RPing before you knew what RPing was, kind of.
Sure. Playing that make believe stuff. I was right there with you. Used to pretend I was a Power Ranger when I was a kid. Beat up Zordon because I pretended I was a running ranger, but that's besides the point. Anyway, how did you come across ESO then?
Well, I was already sort of a massive fan of the Elder Scrolls, which is a given, and it was mainly just it's another Elder Scrolls game. I was very much initially of the camp who's going, this looks crap. Why are they doing it? I don't like MMOs. They're going to ruin the Elder Scrolls, sort of thing. And I was very hesitant. I wasn't going to buy it. I was very, very hesitant to actually buy ESO. But then I got the beta and I played it. And it was like, it wasn't perfect back then, but I enjoyed it. And so I caved in. I bought the special edition as well. So I've still got the statue of Molag Bal on my desk at home.
Well, you kind of need the special edition to unlock the imperial race, didn't you?
Yeah, that was it. I was forced. I was disgruntled. I was very disgruntled when I bought it because that was one of my major issues with it. The Imperials were a paywall. I was irked because initially, they just wasn't going to be Imperials because they didn't announce the special edition. I generally, I'd liked Imperials at this point. That's what I played in Skyrim. I played in Oblivion and Morrowind and stuff, and I enjoyed their culture and stuff. So when they didn't announce them as a race in ESO in any of the alliances, I was substantially pissed off, but it was somewhat alleviated when it was revealed that they would be a thing, just annoyingly behind £100 paywall or something like that.
£100, Jesus.
Yeah, that's Exposition. I got a physical one. It wasn't very cheap. If I remember right, it wasn't cheap.
Jesus. Well, that's dedication right there. Cinemax, if you're listening, you got a hardcore customer right here. Don't you let him down. Jesus.
Yeah. Just give me Clovia, please. I want. It's all I've been asking. Just more of Cyrodiil. It's all I've been asking for about 3-4 years now.
This actually makes me think about this one thread that was on the forums once, where people debated if they wanted a quest version of Cyrodiil, without the PvP. What do you think of that?
I'd be all in favour for it, honestly. Really? Cyrodiil is such an unused zone, and it's got such nice locales for RPing, and the fact that you can't is a shame, honestly. But I feel like if I did it, what you'd have to do is change it up a bit to show that the war's still going. You don't want either end the Alliance War or do PvE Cyrodiil, but still make it obvious that the war's still being fought. Don't just write it off like Zos has kind of done already, which is just kind of ignore it. There's not been much to do with the Alliance War in any of the new content.
Yeah, they've never really gone back to it. I think that they won't be getting back to it now for a while. They might go the WoW route where they'll focus on third party villains until finally, you'll get like a Battle for Azeroth type of deal. I'm guessing that's how it'll go. That's just me.
I mean, we know that they're seeming to do sort of areas tucked away from anything to do with that, because we had Varnfell, which is completely irrelevant to that sort of storyline. We're having Somerset, which from the data mine content appears to be the same, just stuff to do with Sigix and Slode and God knows what else.
So moving away from that a little bit, let's just backtrack a little bit here. So you said you played Elder Scrolls Oblivion and Skyrim. Let me ask you this. Comparing the two together, which do you think is better objectively?
With Oblivion and Skyrim, I think you each have areas where they're better. I think Oblivion has better quests, like, the Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, things like that, and Shivering Isles. It's got, a lot of it. I think it has more character, and I feel like stuff like that is better. But I feel like Skyrim has much better landscape, sort of world building, things like that. It's a lot nicer to explore, and then it's not just in like graphics, which of course is an issue. It's just the shaping of it is much better in that, and it's got better
potato faces.
Yeah, better combat and stuff. But it's a bit laws, a bit better. But yeah, no, I feel like they each kind of had the areas to do. But for me, it'll be Oblivion, just because of nostalgia and because it's a better RPG. It's got more sort of character creation elements.
Yeah, one of the major, I shouldn't say major, but one of the big complaints that I heard about Skyrim versus Oblivion was the spell system. It was dumbed down just a little bit for, when you compare the two games together. You didn't have spell crafting, which is apparently going to be a big thing when Somerset comes in.
Yeah, they seem to have data mined it from Somerset. Yeah, which is interesting because it's easy enough to do in a single player game, but it's gonna be quite interesting to see how they do it in an MMO.
I think, I don't know, what have you read on the data mine stuff? Potential spoilers for anyone that's listening, by the way, in case we have spoiler Nazis in the audience.
With Somerset, I've seen bits, sort of like ripped bits of like architecture, things like that, certain bits of dialogue and quest text, mainly, detailing like things like, to my irritation, how Irene has opened the borders of Somerset to everyone, apparently. Which seems a very un-Outma thing to do, considering that they very much dislike having anyone except Altma on Somerset Isle. In the Second Empire, there was literally just a few imperial administrators, and that was really it, and ambassadors.
I'm expecting another assassination attempt after this. I'm supposing that it'll be there, which would be kind of interesting story-wise. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'd like to sit down with one of those story writers one of these days and be like, what the fuck were you thinking?
Yeah, they kind of have to sort of almost hand wave it just so people can actually go there. I think generally I'd just rather just have it as just like, oh yeah, well, you're the vestige, you're famed throughout Tamriel at this point, you can kind of come over here. But I suppose when you've got everyone running around, you kind of need to make up for all the other people who aren't you.
The vestiges and the other vestiges, they're all popular throughout the land.
Yeah, there's just vestiges everywhere now. They're commodity. They're cheap.
So moving back to ESO then, walking into the game when you first played the beta, it kind of sounds like you didn't. Did you have any expectations when you started playing the beta? What was that experience like for you? Let's get into that.
I had low expectations, very low. I was like, oh, I'll play this. I'm probably not going to like it, and I'm just going to be angry. So I kind of got in, and it was like, it was a bit glitchy, it was a bit buggy and stuff, but I enjoyed it, and I kind of managed to delve into it more than I had with other MMOs. At least, I found it more engaging. Mm. Surprisingly, with the beta, I kind of knew I already was going to play Daggerfall Covenant side then, because I had humans and stuff like that in that side, and I thought that's closest for an Imperial to go to. So I played the beta through as Yonmari Dominion, and a bit rare. But yeah, and kind of enjoyed that sort of initial thing, Knarthy's Roost, things like that. I didn't get much out of the starter zone, to be fair, because I was playing with my friend at the time who'd also got beta access, so we kind of just ran around then. I wasn't taking it too seriously and just kind of seeing what it was like.
Okay. Moving onwards to this question. This question is sort of like a before and after, right? So let's use the Morrowind expansion as our demarcation line, right? How do you look at the game now after Varden fell versus before Varden fell? Do you think that, has there been any obviously, has there been any major improvements? Do you think that, has there been game making strides, or what do you think about that? Let me ask you.
I think there has been, and I think it's in so much as, well, Rothgar kind of showed it as well, but the sort of improved, how the writing's improved is one of the major things that strikes out to me, because the sort of base game was a bit, poorly written for a lot of it. It wasn't, it's not going to win any awards for that. It was a bit sort of just generic. But I think with the expansions, they're being able to craft stories a lot better, write characters. Take for example, I know it's after Varden fell, but with Clockwork City, how they wrote Sather Sillen, people like that. Characters that they're exploring more into sort of things of lore that are generally washed over. They're delving more kind of into the world of the Elder Scrolls, I feel, which is because I think it's more focused, so they can do. They're not, having to create whole continent of Tamriel, lots of Tamriel, and sort of make it sort of generic-y. They know that they kind of can go more into this, and I feel like that's one of the things. I mean, you've generally got as well sort of patches, things like that, battlegrounds, but I think the writing and the quality of the new piece of content with the stories and everything is my major thing of how they've improved.
Okay. We'll actually get into the meat and potatoes of this interview. Let's talk about your character, Tyrrean Vanarius, the imperial with that nice looking scar on his face. It makes him look very distinguished.
The man, the myth, the legend. Yeah.
How'd you come up with him? Where did you start with him?
At the basics, I wanted to play an imperial, and I kind of wanted to do something to do with the Imperial Legion. So I was just like, right, I will make a imperial soldier. So name and stuff kind of came because I'd already used it. It's kind of a rip from other RP I'd done, and I kind of liked it. The Vanarius family is generally why I create my characters as another Elder Scrolls game, and Tyrion was sort of the moniker I'd gone by and used on my characters for years at that point. So I just like slapped them together because I didn't go into ESO planning to RP. I went into it kind of just going to play it as a game. So I created a character mainly for sort of just playing the game, and it was when I decided that quite early in that I wanted to participate in some role playing, something like that. And I looked around, found the Centuria Vindicta, joined that, and that kind of helped me in crafting my character as I became more familiar with the lore, how I wanted to write him, and what the sort of ideas were with the character. It wasn't a sort of process wherein I just made him and he's been the same like that. He's very much been a character that has developed over time as I've became a better writer. I've learned more about the lore, about the culture and stuff, and he's changed with that. The character which was initially created is substantially different from the character now.
So what were the influences in its creation? Was there anything that you took from like what you played in previous games when you thought about, I'm just going to make a Legionnaire here?
Yeah, there was influences from previous games. There was influences from history and things like that, and just sort of mass media bits, things I watched, things I'd seen. But he wasn't overly sort of anything that was particularly influenced off one thing. You get certain characters where you look at them and you can quite see that they're just a rip from something. They're just like take this and kind of do it as an ESO theme.
Sure, like if I had $1 for every Nord I ran into wielding Mjolnir, I wouldn't.
Yeah, you're not need to pay rent for a while.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just said if you got $1 for that, you not need to pay rent for a while.
Yeah. So you mentioned history, and we're going to get back into history just cause. So what sort of historical bits did you think about when?
A lot to do with Rome. ESO was surprisingly one of the reasons that helped my obsession with Roman history, in so much as when I, to try and sort of my understanding of the Imperial Legion and Imperial Society, I kind of delved into the closest thing we have with being Roman, and sort of structure of the Legion and things like that. And as I read that for research and sort of to just sort of help my understanding of sort of a sort of semi-similar culture, it kind of it spurred on into an academic career and everything now. But yeah, it was mainly the Imperial Legion figures.
Are you saying that because of ESO you are now pursuing your degree in ancient to medieval history? Is that what I'm reading from you?
That is accurate, yeah.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I've got some of my earliest books I've got up on my bookshelf right now. Above me is a couple books on the Roman Legion that I used to sort of garner my sort of influence of the Imperial Legion.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so give us the background story, or as much as you like to divulge, about Tyrrean. Where does he hail from? What did he go through? How did he get to where he is now?
Tyrrean is a Clovian through and through. He was I say through and through. Culturally, he's a Clovian. He's born of a Clovian father, Sabius Vanarius, and a Nibonese mother, being Helena of the Clydii.
Nibonese, you can't trust them dang
I know
Nibonese.
those shifty rice farmers and mages. No, so was born in 555 on the 13th of Frostfall. And essentially, he's born into sort of mid-rung Clovian nobility. So sort of, old family, lived essentially in their care for God knows how many generations, and essentially, sort of where everything is kind of predicted. Tyrrean was never the heir. He was very much the spare. His elder brother called Castav, who was essentially meant to take everything over and act as his father would. So, whilst his elder brother essentially would, plan for a career in sort of politics, being a lord, statesman, Tyrrean was shipped off to the Legion as essentially a flesh tithe, doing what Clovians do best and becoming an officer in the Legion, which is essentially the duty of a Clovian nobility. So, at the young age of 14, shipped off to begin his career as a soldier. First, sort of a cadet, training up to be an officer, and then serving in the Imperial Cavalry for a few years, and then finally as a tribune in the Second Legion. As a character, he served around sort of border skirmishes for a while, but it was Varen's rebellion that really sort of cemented him. It was that sort of defining moment, rising up in revolt essentially, and helping to fight against Leovic and siege, take the Imperial City in the end, the throne for Varen.
Why side with Varen, though?
Clovian, and the nature of the Tyrrean was a soldier in the Second Legion, and the Second Legion was essentially the legion that Varen took, one of the first legions that Varen took with him to essentially go. So it's kind of I'm Clovian, this guy's Clovian, the Nibonese are worshipping Daedra, let's go fight them. And a mix of following orders, his legion was Lord of Varen, so he was Lord of Varen.
Let's talk a bit about Varen's rebellion here, because being honest, I've never been, what's the word? I only had the general idea. I don't know all the specifics of Varen's rebellion, so I'd like for you to help me fill in some of the gaps here. Here's what I know. I know that Leovic puts out the edict, says, Daedra worshipping is now legal. Rumor has it that it's because his advisors pushed him to do it. Others say that it's because he was a reachman, yada, yada, yada. Varen says, fuck this. And immediately, does he make a beeline from Corol to Bruma, or was he in Bruma at the time and then made a beeline for Cyrodiil, the Imperial City, excuse me.
He was kind of in sort of the Gavach, sort of Corol area initially, And Varen was actually a supporter of Levic. Generally, he was one of the people who was generally very much like sort of, we just status quo. It's relatively stable, sort of support Levic. But when Levic legalized Daedra worship, it was I think the final nail in the coffin. The Clovians are very sort of religious people, and essentially seeing someone disrespect the eight divines by legalizing the worship of something that's to them evil and abhorrent was more than any of them could probably stomach. So he rallied his legions, most of Clovia. We don't actually know exactly who supported Varen, but we know that it was at least Kvatch, Coral, and probably Skingrad as well. Though Anvil is a notable exception under Ephraim Benerus, who rather than side with Varen was Lord Levic and was an annoying thorn in his side down by Kvatch Way.
Okay, and when he marches on to the Imperial City, was it, how do I say this? Was there fighting in the city, or did he just march on to the castle and then, they had the famous 1v1?
No, it was very brutal sea fighting. If you look at the map of the Imperial City now, where the market district was in Oblivion, it's essentially a graveyard, and it became such because of all the dead. It essentially had to turn it into essentially sort of a mass graveyard sort of funerary area. I'm trying to remember what the district is called now.
Okay, I always figured that was because of the Daedra invading, but looking back, I highly doubt that'd be the case because they wouldn't even have time to bury their dead now, would they? Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so eventually he beats Leovic. He
takes the Imperial Palace and throws Levic, kills Levic, and throws his corpse into the into the sewers, rather.
Into the sewers, yeah. That's kind of insulting when you think about it. I mean,
when
Colovians do something like that, are they that haughty that they just be like, fuck you, we're putting your body in the sewers?
Imagine it was probably done as a massive act of disrespect. Purposely, it was, you've done this, you're not going to get any sort of honourable burial, you're just getting thrown into the sewers. It's, going back to history for a second, it's very much akin to being thrown in the River Tiber in Rome, which was essentially...
The Tiber with Tiberius.
Yeah, well, the Tiber's not... A lot of people think the Tiber's named after Tiberius, but it's named after a king of Alba Longa.
Mm.
This was essentially being thrown in the Tiber was done for the worst criminals, so murderers, rapists, people like that. And essentially, just a massive sign of disrespect that you're not even getting a Roman burial. And I imagine it was something similar here. He was seen so poorly and held in such disregard that they, rather than give him an actual funeral, he was just thrown out into the sewers.
Moving on to Leovic, actually. Are we ever given a reason as to how it is the Longhouse Emperors ever got to power, or just mostly told like, oh yeah, they stormed down to Cyrodiil one day?
Pretty much that. I mean, we know that Dukorak, or however it's pronounced, seized power essentially from Cyrodiil, but we can imagine probably that before him there wasn't much in the way, because following the rule of the Sabian Shurak, the last of the Seishi potentates, that essentially the Empire just falls into chaos. It's lacking any sort of actual stable leadership, and probably it was very much akin to sort of warlords, people in the Elder Council just sort of coming and going, power being very fluid and no one actually having control until the Longhouse Emperor seized power, which generally seems to surprisingly not have been objected to a huge amount initially, because it was I think the Cyrides at that point were probably just glad for some stable leadership, no matter who it was, and they seemed quite accepting. And Dukorak and his son Morikar were quite willing to adapt to Cyrodiilic customs. Generally, such were quite tolerated.
Okay, so it's more like, yeah, they're useful. We'll let them be, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's somewhat. We need someone. These will have to do. But yeah, they was a bit eccentric and alien, but they married into people like Dukorak married Raxia Tharn, sort of to legitimize himself, and they generally would marry sort of relatively prominent Sirods. Leovic himself, married Clivia, Tharn. So it's sort of you've got sort of power sharing with the Tharns, being the most influential noble family of Cyrodiil. You've essentially kind of using them as a way to sort of semi-legitimize their claim.
Moving on then, well actually no, one last question about this. I've long held the theory that Clivia is not really Clivia, right? Like we learn in the Weichel Tower that she's Molag Kina, or at some point they might have body switched. I'm more of the thought that perhaps there was never really a Clivia at the time. It was just some sort of long-winded plan by Molag Bal, who decided, like, you know what, you're going to go down there, you're going to pretend to be this girl, you're going to pretend to be this girl from when she's a baby all the way up to this point, and you're going to go ahead and marry this emperor, and you're going to plunge everybody into chaos. Why? Because I want to invade that shit. And the reason I say this is because, he's the god of schemes, and he's supposed to make plans upon plans upon plans upon plans. So I can sort of see that happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so can I. But there's I think it's mentioned that there's a change. When Clivia's sort of personality and everything sort of changes, generally sort of after the plane meld, when she's probably switched out.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that.
She's not, because she seems relatively competently. Then when you see you see her essentially in the Imperial City giving ridiculous orders and essentially sending soldiers to their death and so on and so forth. So it's probably sort of after the plane meld when Molag Bal can influence Tamriel a lot more that they probably swaps them out.
Okay. Getting into a bit of this is where I guess lore and character backstory intersects. How did Tyrrean take well, let me ask you this question before I get into that. How public is the knowledge of sort of, the idea that the soul burst happened because of Baron shenanigans?
That's a good question, and it's something we don't seem to exactly know. It seems to be relevant, known to some people and not known to others. So it's something that I generally kind of put down to characters' closeness to sort of things. It was probably propagated to a degree, but it was generally the Soulburst and things like that was blamed on the Mages Guild initially. That's why they outlawed in Cyrodiil, because they were held responsible for it. So that seems to be at least one of the prevalent theories. And we know that Varen is still essentially de jure the Emperor of Cyrodiil, because he's always, he's missing. He's never formally declared dead. So it's why how Clivia is ruling this region, because Varen's just missing.
Until she's gone, and then eventually it'll be, I think Carolus ought to step up at some point, but I think that he'll probably get left behind in the writing.
Yeah. Carolus technically is the next in line, at least that we know of.
Right, assuming if he didn't have any sons or anything.
Yeah, well, because he's Varen's nephew, and I think that'd be cool. But they've got quite a nice idea with Carolus, with sort of the various people pretend, within Cyrodiil trying to be emperors and trying to, push their claim. They seem to have written Carolus as not wanting to do that and just kind of be focused on the citizens of the Gold Coast. There was, though, there is another figure who's mentioned briefly, who would be quite interesting to see what he's up to, and that's Count Calantius of Skingrad, who's mentioned in various writings, but we never actually see or hear much of him. But we know that he has the ability to launch an invasion into the Old-Mary Dominion, because it's his forces that are in Reaper's March and sort of Malbar Tor. But we don't hear much. So I think if we ever get Clovia, it'll be very interesting to see what he's up to, and if he's trying to push his own claim or something.
Okay. The next question I was going to delve into was, if Tyrrean did know about the Soul Burst, or what caused the Soul Burst, or at least heard any sort of rumors, how he would have taken that. So you say that, they initially blamed it on the Mages Guild. So I assume did that put him at odds with the Mages Guild or anybody who was from the Mages Guild? Generally
not so much, because I've always done Tyrrean as having at least, some sort of awareness of Manimarco's plot sort of thing. There's generally, by being someone who's relatively in and among the sort of imperial hierarchy and the imperial establishment, sort of a bit more clued in to what's gone on than the average citizen. So he's not exactly fond of the Mage Guild anyway, and especially not after some happenings that's been going on with some Mage Guild characters on EU. But no, he's generally not the one who holds responsible for the Soul Burst and Plane Melt. He's kind of aware that it's a Daedric fuckery.
All right, so that's that then. What is the state of Colovia during this time, or during at this point in time? I'm not really sure if I've ever read anything that, oh yeah, they are also being invaded by Daedric fuckery.
We don't know really, is the honest answer, but if we're making assumptions here, we can probably assume that outside of the Gold Coast, it's pretty much just warlords. It's various lords and soldiers that left, essentially just vying for their claim and just trying to survive in the chaos that's going on. It's probably not as hard hit as the Heartland is with invasions and Daedra and stuff, but it's probably not exactly great. Coral was near enough completely destroyed. So the other two cities we have are Skingrad and Such, and we don't really know the states of those. But yeah, if we make assumptions, it's there's no central authority, and it's just kind of resort to the various lords and commanders, essentially just trying to gain power, loot, banditry, pretty much like the fall of the Western Roman Empire. It just reverts into something like that. There's just a bit of chaos and lawlessness.
Switching gears then, let's switching gears back to Tyrion, excuse me. My next question is about, what does he do once Cyrodiil goes to shit? Where does he go? Take us on that journey.
Well, he was, when it kind of all went down, Tyrion was down in the Blackwood, essentially, the arse end of Cyrodiil, trying to secure the imperial borders from Argonian incursions and things like that. And he pretty much tried to remain loyal for as long as he could. Even when Clivia was ruling and Varen was gone, he was a soldier. He was trained to obey orders, command his men, and so he did that. He wasn't exactly getting up to anything good down in the Blackwood, though, utilizing various unethical means to secure victory, such as the imperial tactic of generally lighting the Blackwood on fire.
Because that's definitely worked in the past.
Yeah. If we just didn't burn enough of it down last time. No, things like that, and utilizing the sort of chemical weapons the Empire was using, as we see in Shadowfen. We find some Imperial soldiers there trying to contain some gas that the Empire had created to use against them. So he served there, and was generally recalled back up to the Heartland around early 582, where, attempting to siege one of the forts on the way, him and his men were attacked by essentially an Altmiri counterattack, and pretty much wiped out. Tyrion barely just surviving, suffering a serious wound from an Altmiri Hussar, and surviving only at the behest of his family's, ironically, at the help of an Altmer, his family's longtime friend and sort of servant / tutor, Erevmus Adaril. So after recovering, essentially, and sort of coming to terms that he'd not exactly been doing the most moral of things down there, and essentially that he was serving Clivia, who was a usurper, not rightful and not exactly the best person to follow. He sort of drank himself a bit, dealt with it the old-fashioned way before hearing of the Centuria Vindicta out in the Daggerfall Covenant. Sort of imperial loyalists, people trying to sort of maintain what's left of the Empire, some sort of values and stuff, and he saw it sort of as a sort of redemption as well. I'll serve and try and make up for the stuff I've done, my failings, my loss of my men, and essentially, rather than being a commander as he was a tribune, relatively high up in the Legion hierarchy. Just go and just serve as a foot slogger, essentially, just almost in penance. So that's pretty much what he did after everything went to shit. And since then, he kind of, he worked his way up. He ended up becoming in charge of the CV and assuming command and sort of doing things like that for a while until the CV was promptly mostly wiped out at the Battle of Fort Door, where again the Old Dominion put a stop to his plans. But since then, he's not really been up to much. He was captured by the Dominion for a bit, and now he's back in Cyrodiil, in Calovia currently, pretty much as a warlord, trying to reclaim his family's holdings and accrue some sort of power.
So talk to me about Tyrion's time in the CV. What was that like for him? It sounds like he found a sense of purpose again, started to reorient himself, but...
Yeah, definitely. It was sort of regaining himself, after... I think for him, he's never been someone to really adjust to civilian life, so he sort of needed that sort of military structure, and it gave him a sense of, almost redemption and penance, and as you said, purpose. It was something to do, something to keep his mind active and, keep him busy. So he did that. He was, soldier for a while, then just, as a natural soldier, he, rose up through the ranks and slowly, as I did OOC, would progressed and ended up as an officer, and then subsequently as the Centurion of the CV. And he commanded it and I ran it out of character as a guild for longest period of time. I think 2.5 years, 3 years I probably ran it for. It was in existence for about just over 3 years. And yeah. So
how did that happen? Making your way from the bottom all the way to the top?
Well, I think it's because I was quite dedicated to the guild. I mean, the progression of the CV is kind of, sort of OOC and IC at the same time sort of progression, because for a certain point, when you're becoming an officer, when you're not character as an officer, generally in the guild, you're an officer, you'd have to do stuff like events and things. So I was quite dedicated to it. I, put in a lot of time. I was always at events and stuff, and I enjoyed the RP, and I just sticking around long enough. You kind of when other people drop off, I just kind of ended up in charge of it. Since I was the highest one left at the end, to be fair. But yeah, it's rare that it's quite always surprising that something that I didn't create, nor was I any of the founding members. I just joined as a normal guy, just right at the bottom, just as a normal guildie. I ended up running it, and it's more associated with me than anyone else.
What sort of plots did you run with CV?
I ran a lot. We participated in a lot of community events as well, generally, because we were the only sort of military RP, and though the CV was a bit like Marmite, though, throughout, love-hate relationship with a lot of stuff, but we ran numerous events. We participated in sort of the Bergama, Withering of Bergama, the Stormhaven Demise, sort of Ipsum Regnum, which was a campaign in Cyrodiil. We did one down in Fort Doorway, which was sort of essentially garrisoning this place, and had events going down there in sort of Reaper's March area. I'm trying to remember, there's loads, but it's been so long since I thought about them. We did some RP going around fighting in Cyrodiil. There was another one there. We kind of would go back when before one Tamriel was a thing. It was quite easier to do Cyrodiil because everyone was on the same sort of faction, so you'd all just could just hop in and sort of RP there, and that was always a good time. We participated because it was always sort of semi-neutral in some events out in Skyrim as well, in storylines along there. But yeah, it was a lot of trying to be a part of some community as much as we could, and do our own thing as well.
Do you have any favorite plots that you like to recall? Anyone that you look back on, you're like, oh, that was pretty badass?
I quite liked Ipsum Regnum, which was sort of one we did in Cyrodiil, where it was like, prior to that, it was sort of travelling around. We did loads of, it's like week plus long thing, all just set in Cyrodiil. So, travelling around sort of Coral area, big fights there, meeting other characters. That I always enjoyed. And a few just like the smaller events and stuff we did, there was it was quite a good time. I think the sort of earlier CV, I think, was quite one of my sort of my favourite part of it, to be fair, because it was it was a lot of people just trying to, all just quite dedicated to it, very close knit sort of thing. and it was a nice little community. It was a guild, and I don't miss having to, all the work and stuff it took to run it, but I do. It is something I miss, and I feel like I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. That since it's gone down, it's been a bit of a struggle to sort of find that same sort of flair for RP, because that gave you something to do, planning the plots and making sure that everyone else had RP to do as much as you physically could.
There is a definite difference, I think, when you become an administrator versus when you start out as a member. Essentially, what I've always thought was that when you're leading the guild or when you're an officer, it really does become a job. That's just the long.
Yeah, you become more. Whereas when you're generally just a normal player, you're focused on your own entertainment and having fun. Whereas generally when you're an officer or something like that, or when you're running a guild, it's providing for other people more than yourself.
Not only that, I mean, yes, you are providing for other people. You're also the, I guess, chief representative, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So whenever someone says, let's go talk to these guys, they'd just be like, oh, well, we can talk to this person. He's the guild master. That kind of comes with the job. And I think that, as soon as you understand that it becomes a job, one that you like to do, one that, I would hope you find some enjoyment in. Otherwise, why would you torture yourself? But the sooner you accept that, the better the reality of it all tends to be. Because I'm sure you've been in one of those situations where it's just all frustration all the damn time. You can't go, maybe you can't go, 2 steps forward without some guy chiming in and saying, well, maybe we can do it like this and try to do it this way.
Yeah.
That's all lore appropriate. Yeah, that's that sort of thing.
Yeah, it was the fair share of butting heads with people in the community and drama, and it's what I mentioned earlier. As much as there's people who love and like the CB, there was an equal amount of people who didn't like us and weren't exactly fond.
Well, do you want to get into that?
Yeah, we can. I think to some degree it was I think sort of quite brash and abrasive nature, sort of military RP, and a bunch of people who essentially aren't trying to, you got Daggerfall Covenant, you got these group of people who are essentially their own thing, sort of quite separate and away from it. And I think a bunch of players sort of butted heads with other people in the community. And one period it was a bit the guild at the point was a bit Rome heavy when I decided to start to get a bit obsessed with it, and started to deviate a bit more towards being essentially just Roman LARPing than I would have liked. But that was mainly my fault. But towards the end, I mean, we'd source and back up everything, because there was issues with like people moaning about stuff going, that's not more accurate and stuff. So we substantially ended up just essentially sourcing and could reference everything we ever did with just like some books, some tomes, some reference, so just so no one could have a gripe, because we could back it up completely. So there was a lot of butting heads with people over stuff like that, and I think just issues with you got essentially got a guild that I think a lot of it came IC, but when sort of went OC as things do, you got an essentially, as a military thing, it's very authoritarian in nature. It's hierarchical. So people who are a bit more sort of laissez-faire came into contact with that a fair bit.
Yeah, that's actually a good point when I think about it. The folks who are laissez-faire, they don't tend to do well when it comes to military guilds, I don't think. I mean, it has too much structure. This isn't to say that, the military RPers aren't laissez-faire. All RPers are laissez-faire, but it's to varying degrees, I would say. So, moving right along then, away from CV and back to Tyrrean. One question that I ask everybody is, if you had to look at your character's background story or his history in its entirety, right? Is there a keystone event that changed him significantly, fundamentally, forever? It could be during, his backstory or whatever you RP'd, but what sort of what event would that be? And would you like to get into it?
I think probably Tyrion's joining the army. That so totally changes how someone is, and especially at such a young age. Tyrion was as a child, essentially as a young teen, was nothing akin to the man he would become. He's essentially sort of like he was indoctrinated. He was a product, sort of a political officer as much as he was a actual officer. Sort of the eyes of the empire, sort of very much indoctrinated and ideological as much as he is. Things like that, and I think that sort of thing changed him because when I've never served in the army, but there's a very big difference from being a military life and a civilian life, and I feel like since Tyrion is someone who's essentially spent most of his entire life as a soldier, that sort of adapting to civilian life and issues with that is always something that is going to find challenging, and that would probably be the most crucial point. Either that, or probably that, or when he left the Imperial Legion fully for the same sort of reason, that it's spent so much life as a soldier in a legion, and then everything you believe in, everything just comes crashing down in such a spectacular way that it leaves someone trying to put the pieces back together very much. And so far, I don't think Tyrion's a character. He's just very much trying to regain what he had and what he used to, but to little avail. With the CV, it's him trying to regain some sort of soldierly sort of the way his life lived, and currently he's very much trying to sort of fix regain status, very much of someone of import. As Azuranuff being relatively well known as he is, but it is often province to him. He wants to sort of regain what he had in Cyrodiil, in his homeland, and I feel like that is sort of the main thing. He's sort of someone who's very much looking for something that he has. He's a relic. He's of a time that isn't present anymore, and just constantly nostalgic for what was.
If soldiering is all he knows, do you think there'll ever be a time where he'd ever put his sword down and say, "Okay, that's enough. I can't do this anymore"? Or would he keep soldiering on?
I mean, he's been like that many a time where he's going close to it, where he's like, I can't do this. Was it maybe was it better if I died? Sort of thing. What's going on now? But I feel like he's the sort who probably keep doing it because he doesn't know anything else.
That's kind of sad.
He needs something to do, and I feel like he's not. It's almost not because he wants to do it, just because it's what he knows. It's what he's familiar with. It's fighting, doing it, and just like trying to regain just some sort of sense of what is to him normality.
Yeah, are you happy with the way your character is now? Let me ask you
that. Yeah, I for what I can do, and I think I am, but I feel like,
would you do it all over again?
There'd be things I change, and I feel like one of the main issues, I think, is that there's more I'd like to do with the character, but I'm limited in regards to what we can actually do in ESO, because he's faced very much on a particular facet of RP, being the Empire, things like that, and it's hard to explore that at the moment. With the lack of knowledge, content, lore, sort of places to actually do it. I feel like if I could change anything, it would be able to explore and sort of flesh out the character. And the character's changed as he's got older. Like, I've been playing him since beta, not since beta, since release rather. But he's been around for a while, and the character's changed a lot, and I'm relatively happy where he is now. He's changing more from someone who's quite brash, abrasive, just to maturing a bit and a bit more cold, sort of more calculating, having to adapt to the situation rather. There's only so many things that can be solved at the end of a sword.
Right. Moving on then from this conversation from Tyrion and CV and all that, we're going to get into what I like to call the meta conversation, where we discuss abstract ideas, sort of that sort of deal. My question to you, Taylor, is if you being a lore buff, at least I consider you a lore buff.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. You've RP'd extensively on the EU server. I think you also had a few stints in the North American server as well.
Yeah, I pop up there now and then.
I've always thought that there are innate differences between the RP communities of each server. One of the things that I think is of a definite point is between how the North Americans and the Europeans perceive the lore of the game. What do you think of that? Are there any differences are there any trending differences, any overarching differences between how the North Americans do it and how the Europeans do it when it comes to lore?
I think the major difference in regards to lore is the role of the consensus and the collective. Generally, on the North American server, because you've got such a higher population, there's a lot more different interpretations of things. And generally, if you just don't disagree with someone, you can just go and do your own thing. There's plenty more players. There's RP all over the place. Whereas on EU, it's much more limited community. So generally, sort of adhering to the norm and generally what's accepted is generally a much more prevalent sort of thing. And I feel like because it's harder to avoid people because it's such a smaller community in a smaller area. So if you just decided to go, well, I don't like this, I'm going to go roleplay somewhere else, you're not going to really, because there's only really sort of one main hub of RP. So
the
trying
cloudy dregs in.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Ooh, many a shitty RP has been there.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine. But yeah, I feel like the role plays in people just kind of accepting it. Like, you're going to get, I feel like people are just kind of ignore you if you're doing like shitty lore on an 8. Like, if you're playing throw a bit of shade right now. If you're just playing a generic Bosma with some sort of like Japanese name or whatnot, or something that's just daft, you can generally, people just kind of shrug it off and ignore you because you can just generally do your own thing a lot easier and find people who agree with you. Whereas it's a bit harder on EU, and I feel like to a degree that sort of closeness to sort of just the limited nature of the community means that generally trying to adhere to law is somewhat more important, and more so adhering to the collective on law. And I suppose I'm guilty of this, as anyone is, of often when you see things that are rather outlandish, they're more likely to get shot down per se, and put in their place almost. If you see something that's a character that's a straight rip of a game, if you're just completely defying law,
right,
it's more likely. It's not as likely to be as accepted.
So you think that it comes down to the variability of consensus within?
Yeah, I think it comes down more to the nature of the community than the law itself, and what the community will accept or tolerate.
That's true. In the end, it really is actually about what the community will accept versus what the lore actually says. Right.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that's probably a nature of just between Europe and America. America's a lot more individualist, whereas a lot of Europe, a lot of the continental Europe is substantially more collectivist.
Yeah. Boy, are we individualists.
Yeah. Just love your freedom.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to laugh. I'm not laughing at you. I'm not laughing at the audience. That's good. Okay. Why is the European community smaller? Like, what makes it smaller? If you look at, other games that RP is present on, say SOTOR or Wars 2 or Rift or whatever have you, right? The RP community is generally decent sized. It's not big, but it's decent sized. Now, when I was in the European server, it also tends to have it did also have that smallish feeling to it, right? I mean, you have Stormhaven, And EPRP, I love the EPRP community, but I'm sorry, guys, but you're a lot smaller than Stormhaven. I'm sorry to say, but
yeah, there's pretty much just Stormhaven now.
Yeah, what happened? How did this come to be? If I could get your opinion on that.
There's a few reasons. One of them would be one Tamriel. It sort of drove everyone to one area and just sort of congregated. Whereas they, was kind of semi-independent communities. Everyone just kind of ended up going to one area because that's where the RP was, and it's hard. People don't like hard things to try and make RP outside of it. But I've tried many a times to start up RP in other regions, and I'm as guilty as this. And it gets difficult to try and start up a hub when everyone just wants to be able to just go somewhere and know they can get RP. And I think to a degree, housing as well has done it. So people are just here, there, and everywhere, and they seclude themselves from their houses in their houses a lot as well. But another reason I'd say is I think a lot of Europeans are on NA. There's a substantial amount, and I feel because EU kind of secludes itself a bit. Like if I go on ESO-RP, NA's massively more active on everything. If I go on what all the events are, what all the guilds are, they're all NAPC. So because EU people don't use it that much. I'm a moderator there on the Discord and stuff and everything, so I use it personally, but a lot of people don't. So they see it and then go, "Oh, the RP is on NA." They assume that that's where all the English-speaking RP is going to be, and everyone thinks that it's all going to be French and Germans and everything on EU, which there is them, but I barely ever see them, and I've RP'd there for years. They very much do their own thing, and
there's always the token Polish RP guild in every European.
Yeah, I've never seen the Polish ones. To be fair, I've seen Italian, French, and German and Russian. But they're only like once in a blue moon. Mostly everyone speaks English, and to a degree. I think as well. No, it's kind of. I feel like maybe it's because I've been away, but it has got smaller lately, or at least I feel like there's less of a community.
When we look at, say, demographics-wise, whenever there's a new content release, be it a DLC or an expansion, the population just sort of climbs up just a little bit.
Yeah, it swells and then decreases. I think that happened a bit with Morrowind. You got a bunch of people come over, and it's kind of declined now. Varnfell RP is a thing. That's kind of the only other place outside Stormhaven where there's at least some sort of constancy of RP. But yeah, it swells and then decreases, and I feel like one of the best way to see the sort of population decline, or at least a change in things, is that amount of guilds. There's not many guilds anymore. Yeah, so at least in the EU, I can think of like a couple. There's the Gold Coast Trading Company. There's some people who play knights and stuff like that. A few house guilds and mages guild, and your generic shitty edgelord vampire guild, which is always exists.
Nyrin. No, I'm kidding. Nyrin.
Nyrin's fine. Nyrin's a great guy. There's
I had about this shit.
Yeah, there's Nyrin would agree with me because he'd probably know who I'm implying here with a shitty vampire RP. Cough. Something Dominion. Cough.
But no, joking aside, just disclaimer, I love Nyrin. I was just playing around.
Just throwing a cheeky bit of shade.
Yeah. Getting back to the lore bit, then, I've always had this idea in my head that there's a dichotomy between people that interpret the lore. You have the strict constructionists, which, if it's not in the lore, fuck it, we're not doing it. Even if it's vague, we're not doing it. Fuck that shit. Whereas Luke's constructionists, they're, just because it's not in the lore doesn't mean that we don't have the framework to infer. Both sides have their strong points, obviously. What would you consider yourself, being a PhD of loreology?
I consider myself someone who generally I stick to the lore and use it wherever it's present, but I feel like there's the lore enough is there to infer. You can infer stuff from it and take what's reasonable. There's you've got to fill the gaps in. if we just went solely on what's on the lore, there'd be a lot of holes. Like, there's certain things where we can reasonably assume, reasonably infer from it that there's certain things.
Like what?
Oh, take for example, we can infer that things like people live their lives, or bits of culture, bits of like how things are structured, like, and kind of guess certain infer and kind of construct the structure of serial and stuff, even though it's not directly like laid out. I think it's a habit of piecing things together, because no one law book tells us everything, so you've got to kind of piece it together, take what's reasonable, and put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that is Tamriel together. And there's certain things as well, like you can generally. I'll sometimes use a bit of apocrypha, sort of like headcanon-y within reason, very much stuff that I feel like I'm not as much as a purist where it's got to be referenced and everything, but I feel like if you're doing a headcanon or something, where you're just taking stuff and trying to create it yourself, or trying, stuff that would be legitimate in Tamriel, you've got to have some sort of reasoning and some sort of backing between what we have in sort of, I say set in stone, nothing set in stone due to the unreliable narrator, but that we've got in sort of sourced books in the game and so on and so forth. There's if you're essentially just like take purely what we've got in writing in that, it limits what you can do. The thing of role playing is exploring the wider world. You're writing within the setting, and writing stories in it. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to, at least to some degree, fill in the gaps.
Okay. All right. Tyrian, Taylor, thank you so much for coming out, being my guest tonight.
Thanks for having me.
To have you. We are nearing the end of our interview, and then I'll let you be free, let you scamper out in the fields. But as always, we conclude this interview with the 10-item Marcel Proust questions. This was first used on Bouillon de Culture, then used in the program inside the Actors Studio, and now used for this program. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Number 1. What is your favorite word?
Plethora. I don't know why. I quite like it. It rolls off the tongue very nicely.
What is your least favorite word?
I don't know. I don't think I have one. It'll probably be something like moist or something like that. That just sounds. It sounds very much moist. Yeah.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I don't know. I'm influenced by a lot of things, by history, by books, by current events, by media. I get kind of sort of anything sort of creative output from a lot of sources. For example, I'm currently reading again The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. That's sort of influencing how I write. Sort of a character that's sort of Machiavellian, sort of politicking, and influencing how one in that sort of situation would act. And I think plenty of things just sort of directly sort of give me that sort of creative spark.
You gotta give me one thing.
Right. One thing then. I'd probably go history, just as as someone who studies it. It's probably my biggest creative influence.
What turns you off?
I'm not sure. I think, at least in regards to ESO, when stuff's rooted too much in modernity, sort of like very much relativism, that sort of where people impart the modern world and modern values on things that wouldn't hold them. It's an issue in my field of study as much as it is in the sort of creative thing. When you're trying to write someone from a faux medieval setting, and they've got very much sort of as if they were from the 21st century plonked into this world.
What is your favorite cursed word?
I don't know. There's so many good ones. Probably just shite or arse or something like that. Or probably the ones I say most commonly.
Okay. What sound or noise do you love?
Probably laughter. It's quite, I don't know, it's a bit of an avant-garde thing, but it's when someone's enjoying themselves and having a laugh.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The people outside my apartment building staying up and making God knows what noise till about 4 a.m.
Dang kids and their...
Yeah, damn. People not letting me sleep. A particular annoyance at the moment, and one that's been driving me insane for a few days.
Number 8. What profession, other than your own, or in this case, what would you like to attempt?
Probably it's been the same vein, but probably archaeology. It's what I wanted to do as a younger kid, though. I've gone more into a scholarly field, but the practicality of that digging up stuff is something that always interests me.
What profession would you never in a million years not want to do? They cannot pay you enough to do it.
I don't know, a prostitute or something like that.
And finally, for our last question, if heaven exists, if it does, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well, hopefully not that I'm being sent to hell.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been episode 9 of Elder Scrolls Spotlight. Thank you all for joining me. Tyrian, once again, thank you. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next episode.